leaders of the world look to the United States as we make this important political choice. Each of them is asking the same question we're all asking. Whom will the voters choose? David, it's a tremendous decision.
It might well be the most crucial one they'll ever make. And NBC will present the quickest and clearest results of this decision election night.
NBC newsmen will be covering every hotly contested race, every important electoral vote, every election night tramp.
And a picked crew of newsmen will be here at Election Central working with Chet and me, and returns will come in here from everywhere. Across these boards will come the election results, bright, clear, easy to read. And here's a great improvement, Chet, our desk, designed to have some legroom.
A definite asset for us, David. And for you, the viewer, a clear and complete election picture on the network where news comes first.
On NBC.
We have as our guests today here in Washington two men who have carried much of the responsibility for organizing the opposing presidential campaigns. Mr. Leonard Hall for the Republicans, Mr. Robert Kennedy for the Democrats. Our time will be divided equally between them. By a toss of the coin, Mr. Kennedy was selected to lead off. Mr. Kennedy is the brother of the Democratic presidential nominee, Senator John Kennedy. He managed his brother's senatorial campaigns, and he served as the chief counsel of the Senate committee which investigated labor racketeering. We'll start the questions with Mr. Spivak.
Mr. Kennedy, the other day, according to the New York Times, Vice President Nixon charged that if Senator Kennedy is elected president, and I quote, the chances are that Walter Reuther will name and control Mr. Kennedy Secretary of Labor. What's your answer to that?
Well, I don't think that there is absolutely, of course, no truth in it. I think that Walter Reuther has supported Senator Kennedy in this campaign, and we are very pleased to have his support. The UAW has supported Senator Kennedy in the campaign. I don't think there's anything in Senator Kennedy's career that indicates that he takes orders or instructions from anybody. I think he's shown always throughout his career in Congress and in the Senate of the United States that he is independent, that he will listen to the advice and ideas of many different people in many different walks of life. But in the last analysis, he decides for himself what he's going to do. Maybe Walter Reuther is going to have a suggestion or a recommendation about the Secretary of Labor. Maybe other people will have a recommendation. I'm sure those people will be considered by Senator Kennedy if everything turns out all right on Tuesday, and he would finally decide, ultimately make up his mind himself, as he did on the question of the vice presidency. Certainly Lyndon Johnson wasn't the selection of Walter Reuther for the Democratic nominee for vice presidency. But Senator Kennedy listened to his advice, thought that Lyndon Johnson would be the best for the country, would help the Democratic Party and help the United States, and he wanted with Lyndon Johnson, and he so selected him.
Mr. Kennedy, as far as you know, has Senator Kennedy made any commitments to any group or any individual in private?
He's never made any commitment. I don't think that probably there has ever been a campaign where a candidate has never made any commitment to any individual or any group for any position in government of any kind.
I'd like to take you now to the campaign itself. Would you say that this has been a particularly clean and fair campaign, or would you say it's been a dirty one?
No, I think that it's been a relatively clean campaign.
On the question of registration, I believe you said at one time that that could very well, the number of new people who were registered could very well determine this election. Have you any idea now as to how many new voters were registered in this campaign and what percentage are registered as Democrats?
Well, I would think that there were approximately 10 million people who were registered, new people that were registered. And I would expect that out of that 10 million, I would hope that about 9 million of them will vote in this election, because a higher percentage vote in the year that they've registered. And I would expect that out of that 9 million that we will receive that probably 6.5 to 7 million of them are Democrats. I think it's going to make a major difference in this campaign.
Mr. Burkholzer.
Mr. Kennedy, most of those who have been following Senator Kennedy's campaign have observed that he's changed quite considerably in his method of campaigning, his approach to the voters, his approach to the whole campaign. Has any or much of this been at your direction, and could you indicate anything that you might have instructed him to do a little better?
No, that comes back to, I think, my answer to the first question. Senator Kennedy makes up his mind on these matters himself. He might have recommendations or ideas of about matters, but he makes up his mind. Certainly as to his procedure in this campaign, it was all his own decision. He decided for himself.
You said you thought it had been a relatively clean campaign up to now. Do you consider that you're campaigning against the new Nixon or the old Nixon?
I can't tell. It changes day to day.
Mr. Childs.
You said in your answer to Mr. Spivak, Mr. Kennedy, if everything turns out all right on Tuesday, have you any doubts on that score?
I think you always have doubts. I'm confident. I think that we have a lead. I think that there is a trend for the Democratic Party and for Senator Kennedy across the country. But I think a lot of it's going to depend upon the work that's done on Election Day. If we do the work that has been set up to do to get out the votes, because the Democrats historically do not do as well as the Republicans in getting out their votes. I think that they get out probably 10% less of their people than the Republicans do. If we we do the work on Election Day, and this trend is what we believe it is, I think Senator Kennedy will win. All the indications from across the country are that there is a trend in the direction of Senator Kennedy and the Democratic Party.
You must, Mr. Kennedy, being a very expert campaign manager, have your own private guess on electoral votes on Tuesday for your candidate. What's your minimum number that you think he will get?
269.
Oh, well, that's being much too modest, isn't it?
No, I don't. To be completely truthful with you, I haven't figured the votes out. I'm working on it state by state rather than the overall total. I think that we're going to win, and that's what we're interested in. But beyond that, I think it's difficult.
We can
win by various different combinations, and that's what we're working on.
The New York Times today, in apparently very late report from around the country, gave, in effect, these states to Kennedy, or leaning very strongly: New York, Connecticut, Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin, Illinois, Massachusetts, and New Jersey. Would you agree with those states?
I think that we have leads in each one of those states.
Each one of those states.
Mr. Wilson.
Mr. Kennedy, how are you faring in the South? Is the Democratic ticket going to lose any southern states in this election?
Well, I think that Virginia, I think, is now a toss-up. I think we were way behind in Virginia at the beginning. I think we're ahead in North Carolina. I think that we are behind in South Carolina. I think we have a chance, but I think we're behind in South Carolina. I think Florida is a toss-up. I think Texas, that we can win, but I think it's a struggle. I think Tennessee is a struggle. I think that we can win Tennessee. I think we can win the state of Kentucky. I think we'll win Louisiana. I think that the other states in the solid South might very well vote with Senator Kennedy.
In view of the fact that you recognize that there is Southern opposition to Senator Kennedy, possibly stemming in part from the platform.
Yes.
How can Senator Kennedy look forward to getting his program through Congress when he has such strong opposition from Southern elements?
Well, I think that the members of Congress from the South and from the members of the Senate from the South will recognize this as a mandate. Senator Kennedy is run on a platform. He's run on certain commitments that he feels that he should meet and that the next administration should meet in the field of education, in the field of medical aid to the elderly people, in the field of Social Security. And I think that it will be recognized. I think when the President of the United States says that he wants these bills through, that he wants this legislation passed, it's going to be much more forceful than if the President of the United States says, if this legislation is passed, I'm going to veto it. And I think that we have a very good chance of getting a lot of this legislation through.
I recall that President Truman had a very extensive program which he offered to the Congress. Some estimated that it would cost $60 billion. He estimated that it would cost far less than that. However, he never was able to get it through Congress because of the opposition of Southern and Republican elements in Congress. I just wondered if this doesn't go to the question of leadership and whether a Democratic president, in view of the strong opposition to the South, can successfully claim that he can establish a leadership in Congress and in the government which exceeds anything that preceded him.
Well, certainly, if you take as the alternative Vice President Nixon, he's going to have a very, very difficult time, particularly after this campaign and the statements that have been made during the course of the campaign. He is going to have an extremely difficult time working with Congress. I think that Senator Kennedy would have a much easier time. I recognize that there are apt to be problems and difficulties with some of those who do not support his program within the Democratic Party. But I think that we will make progress. I don't say that everything that he's in favor of will get through Congress, but at least we're going to start taking steps forward in that direction, and I think that's the important thing. I'm not saying that it's all going to be perfect, but he's going to, I think, and he's exhibited during this campaign that he can furnish the leadership to the country, and we will be taking steps in the right direction.
This is another question I'd like to ask you. What are the steps you will take specifically in the right direction?
Well, I think first, you mean domestically or foreign?
Yes, domestically. I know that probably there's a wide range. Just name three, if you...
All right, well, I think in the field of medical aid to the elderly, we consider the fact that there are 10 million Americans over the age of 65 who live on incomes of less than $20 a week, who have medical bills amounting to more than $200 a year. That Senator Kennedy feels that these people shouldn't have to come in and sign a pauper's oath in order to get help and assistance. And he intends to push through a program to help and assist our elderly people through Social Security. He will move in the field of education. The fact that we have 50,000 of our teachers who are undertrained, another shortage of 50,000 teachers. We have 132,000 shortage of classrooms. The Soviet Union spends some 3 times as much on education as we do in the United States. Turns out twice as many scientists and engineers as we do in this country. He will move in the field of education. He will move in the field of foreign affairs to reestablish our relationship and our position with South America, with the countries of Africa, so that everybody, these countries, understand that they are partners of the United States, and that the only time that we take action is not just a reaction to the Soviet Union, that we have a policy and a program of our own.
With respect to the first two you named, which were domestic matters, these issues came up in the special session of Congress, which was held after the conventions were over, and there was no progress then under Senator Kennedy's leadership. Do you feel that there will be a drastic change in Congress?
I'll tell you, I think there's a very good reason that there wasn't any action at that time. In the first place, it was 3 weeks in which to try to work this out. In the second place, the President of the United States, President Eisenhower, said if either of these measures were passed, he'd veto them. It made it virtually impossible at that time. That's the reason. You've got a President of the United States who gives leadership to the country, who says, I want these measures through, we've got to move in these areas, and you're going to get them by.
Well, did he not have programs in those areas also?
Yes.
Yes.
Mr. Spivak.
Mr. Kennedy, a minute or so ago, I think you said that the trend was toward the Democratic Party. Is that trend still there? I've heard rumors that there's going to be a sizable shift announced tomorrow by the Gallup poll, bringing the thing into much closer position, much closer balance. Have you evidence from your private polls that the trend towards the Democratic Party has been continuing?
Yes, and I think that it's true in across the country. As I have said, when Mr. Gallup came out with his poll last week, that I don't think that you can put a complete reliance on polls. I think that the individuals in the areas who are working on this day-to-day often have a better idea as to what is going on than a pollster. Even when he said we were ahead, I felt that I could rely more, and I know Senator Kennedy and the rest of us feel that we could rely more on the individuals in some of these states as to what is going on. And I'm extremely confident over the period of the last 3 or 4 days. I've talked to people in most all of the states of the Union, and there is a definite trend in our direction. It's true in the Midwest, it's true in the East, and it's true in the far West. I'm extremely encouraged. As I say, once again, largely going to be on how much work we do on Election Day. We can't take anything for granted, any state for granted. But I think if the work's done, we can win.
Well, have you found, then, that the appearance of President Eisenhower has made no difference in favor of Vice President Nixon?
I think that's correct, and I think, in addition to that, I think that in many areas of the United States, there is a strong feeling that it's a sign of panic on the part of Vice President Nixon, that he has to bring President Eisenhower into the election to such an extent in the closing days of the campaign.
But you say that your own polls indicate that there has been no reversal of trend, and therefore if the Gallup poll tomorrow does show a reversal of trend, You won't be any more disturbed by that than you felt happy about the Gallup poll in your favor?
That's correct. I would say that from our own surveys that either Mr. Gallup is wrong or Mr. Harris, who's been doing our surveys, are wrong. I would hope that Mr. Gallup's wrong.
May I have one more question, and this one on spending? Dateline, the official publication of the Republican National Committee, was charged the other day that if all the organizations supporting Kennedy, including the AFL-CIO, COPE, and Walter Reuther, are taken into account, it's obvious that the Democrats outspend the Republicans 2-1. You give us any idea of how much money the Democrats have spent in this campaign?
No, I couldn't at this time. Most of it is in the field of television and radio. I think it's very easy to determine. 90% of, and I'm sure Mr. Hall will bear me out, but 85 to 90% of what a organization spends in a campaign goes into television and radio and the advertisements in newspapers. So it can be pretty well determined as to what is spent.
And you don't believe the Democrats have outspent them?
Well, I don't think there's any question about that. I think all you have to do is look around you at what's spent on television, radio, what's spent in the newspaper. I think campaigns are far too expensive, Mr. Spivak. And I think that this is the wrong way to handle a campaign. I think that there should be some definite limit, and I don't think that the people involved in campaigns should have to go scrounge around to try to get money as all of us have to do, and particularly in closing day of a campaign. I don't think there should be so much emphasis on that. And I think that the government should take some steps to limit campaign expenditures and the manner in which they are raised. I agree with that there's a problem there, but I certainly don't agree that we have spent more than the Republicans.
Mr. Burkholzer.
Mr. Kennedy, Pierre Salinger, the press spokesman for Senator Kennedy, is quoted today as saying that one TV appearance was canceled that had been scheduled for Senator Kennedy because of a shortage of funds. Is there a shortage of funds in your campaign at this point?
Yes.
Is it a shortage severe enough that it might cost you the election, do you think?
I think we're going to win the election. We canceled the television appearance tonight.
Governor Rockefeller has also been quoted as saying something quite to the contrary of the reports you've been getting. He says New York State is now going to go for Nixon. How do you reconcile this? Is this the...
I think, I don't know who can tell at this juncture. I think we're going to have to wait until Tuesday. They said in the state of West Virginia that we would lose 60-40 3 weeks before the election day. We won 60-40. I mean, it's my feeling from talking to our people throughout the country, traveling myself, Senator Kennedy's feeling that the trend is in our direction. We can't tell that. That's what we believe, and that's what we feel. I think Election Day, Tuesdays, we're all going to be able to tell. The New York News poll, which is under ordinary circumstances has been very accurate, shows that Senator Kennedy is ahead in the state of New York 55% to 45%. Governor Rockefeller feels differently. We're going to find out Election Day who's more accurate, the New York News or Governor Rockefeller.
Mr. Childs.
Senator Kennedy has been criticized for something he said in one of the debates with reference to Jimmy Hoffa, and that is that he was unhappy because he was still free, because Hoffa was still free. I know you directed that investigation, and I wonder if you feel the same way about Hoffa. And his
I think it's an extremely dangerous situation at the present time that this man who has this background of corruption and dishonesty, who's misused hundreds of thousands of dollars of union funds, betrayed the union membership continuously, sold out the union membership, put gangsters and racketeers in positions of power, still heads up the Teamsters Union. I think the vast majority of Teamster Union members and Teamster Union officials are honest, and we've shown that again and again. But the leadership at the top is corrupt. I think with the great economic power that he has and the abuse of it, I think it's an extremely dangerous situation. Mr. Hoffa was indicted for bribery down here in Washington, D.C. in connection with giving $2,000 to a committee investigator and receiving some documents. He was acquitted. We investigated afterwards. The jury found that one of the jurors refused to take a lie detector test on whether he was a homosexual. One of the jurors had been convicted of crimes, 18 convictions. Another had 12 convictions. Another had 6 convictions. And a fifth had his son in the penitentiary for narcotics pushing at the time the trial was going on. We feel that these cases should be handled in a better fashion.
But he was tried again and acquitted again, wasn't he, Mr. Kennedy? And doesn't this seem a little bit like a personal vendetta that you and your brother are waging against?
No, I think it's any more than I suppose that it's not a personal vendetta to be against corruption and dishonesty. It's not just Mr. Hoffa. I don't think that enough has been done in this whole field dealing with organized crime in the United States. I think we're still dealing with organized crime as we did during the 1930s. It wasn't a personal vendetta against Al Capone during the 1930s when the government was investigating that. I think that the federal government has handled this matter without any great efficiency or care.
A Kennedy administration what would a Kennedy administration do in the field? Just take Jimmy Hoffa as an example. Could you try him again, or could you?
Well, I think that first that an investigation should be made in this whole field, not just of Mr. Hoffa, but in all of these fields dealing with organized crime. For instance, the meeting up at Appalachian, New York. There wasn't any federal government agency where you had 60 of the top gangsters of the United States all went to a meeting in upstate New York. There wasn't one federal agency that knew anything about the meeting. They have no intelligence in the field of organized crime as there is, for instance, in the field of communism. I think that will be changed.
Now, Hoffa's opposing Senator Kennedy. Is this having any influence on the election, do you think?
Well, he's speaking a good deal around the United States against Senator Kennedy and urging his Teamster officials to oppose him. I think that Senator Kennedy will get the support of the vast majority of Teamster members and organized labor generally, because I don't think that they accept his leadership as to how they should vote in the election.
Mr. Wilson.
Mr. Kennedy, how has the so-called religious issue in this campaign come out in the end? Now that we're near the end of the campaign, are you able to say whether this issue has helped Senator Kennedy or hurt him?
Well, I think it's one of the great imponderables of this election. I think it's awfully difficult to assess. I think it was at its height 7 or 8 weeks ago. I think that there's been more attention on it in the last 10 days. Again, as to what its effect will be on the election, it's going to have some effect in both areas. There will be some non-Catholics who will vote against Senator Kennedy because of his religion, and I expect some Catholics who will vote for him because of his religion. As Senator Kennedy said, he feels that both are equally wrong. I was down in North Carolina last night. The governor of the state of North Carolina said that he felt that this problem or difficulty would cost us maybe 200,000 votes in the state of North Carolina, that we'd still win the state of North Carolina. As to what the particular and specific effect of it's going to be, I think we're going to have to wait until after election. I think that it's having less effect now than it did 6 or 7 weeks ago.
Is there such a thing as a Catholic bloc vote in this election?
No, there is not. And I think all the polls have indicated to that effect. We have, for instance, in the New York News poll, we have less support of the Catholics in New York City, particularly the Irish Catholics, than any other group.
Some other polls show that you have 75% of the Catholic vote, however.
Well, I'm not aware of those.
Mr. Spivak.
Mr. Kennedy, in Pittsburgh the other day, President Eisenhower said the election of Senator Kennedy would mean uncontrolled inflation. And the Republicans, I believe, are hammering hard at that inflation issue. Would you say that it has become an issue of importance with the voters?
Well, I haven't picked it up particularly. I think that voters are convinced, and people that have seen Senator Kennedy are convinced that he believes in a sound fiscal economy here in the United States, a sound dollar. Pointed out that the greatest deficit spending that we've had in the history of the United States was while President Eisenhower was president in 1958, when we had a deficit of $12 billion. We have had deficits of more than $20 billion in the last administration, the greatest in the history of the United States. He feels that steps can be taken in order to prevent this, which haven't been taken in the last administration.
Do you think it's going to be possible to make good on the welfare planks of the Democratic platform without either increased taxation or without inflation?
Well, I would have to get down into specifics. I would say that certainly in the field of medical aid to the elderly, education, and some of these other fields that we can take. These things aren't going to be solved overnight, Mr. Spivak. I mean, these things are going to have to be taken in steps. He feels that we can do it, but he's going going to support a balanced budget. He's going to do whatever he can to get these things accomplished.
We have about 1 minute. Mr. Burkholzer.
Mr. Kennedy, most people seem to think the television debates were very favorable to your candidate. If he should win, as you say he will, would you advise him to accept television debates in 1964?
I'd rather face that in 1964.
Mr. Childs.
Would you have a place in a Kennedy administration, Mr. Kennedy?
Well, I have nothing's been said to me, and I don't think I would. Because of the reason I think that it's virtually impossible in view of our relationship.
Mr. Wilson.
In the event of Senator Kennedy's election, is he prepared to cooperate with the outgoing Republican administration in the 73 days between the election and the inauguration?
Yes, completely and fully.
This will not be a repetition of 1952, in which there was an arm's-length attitude between President Truman and Mr. Eisenhower.
Certainly not as far as Senator Kennedy is concerned.
Gentlemen, we probably have a lot of questions that could be asked, but I see that our time has run out. We've reached the midway point in the program, and it's time to hear from Mr. Hall. Thank you very much, Mr. Kennedy, for being with us. We'll be back with the second portion of Meet the Press in just a moment. First, this message.
These are the men, Chet Huntley and David Brinkley. They will spearhead NBC's election night coverage, backed by the same news staff which won nationwide acclaim for its performance at the nominating conventions. Together, they will offer the clearest, easiest to understand election night picture. This is the machine, the miracle RCA 501 electronic computer, which will forecast the voter's choice far in advance of the final tally. This machine's prodigious feats of speed and accuracy will make you immediately aware of election night trends first on NBC. This is NBC's visual device that will project large, big-screen number totals. They will be clear and distinct at all times. So for astute reporting and analyzing by Chet Huntley and David Brinkley, instant forecasts by the most advanced electronic computer, and full-screen, easy-to-read number totals, the network to watch for election night results is NBC.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.